Okay, has most everyone got their desserts? Hey, everybody got their desserts? Can't hear me? Can't hear me? Can't hear me? No. No. I tried. I tried. Okay. Brother Eric asked that tonight that we talk a little bit about the founding of the United States. Last week he talked about Marxism and the Communist Manifesto and Karl Marx's idea, the way he'd like to see things go. It's not hard to see that based on what he showed you last week, it doesn't work. I was talking to someone earlier this evening, and it reminded me of a conversation that I had about a month ago with one of our translators that has worked with us in Ukraine for years, that is now living in the United States. Tanzala is here, and she called me and she said, "Debbie, what is going on?" Said, "What's happening in the United States right now is the very thing I left Ukraine for." Said, "This is socialism. It doesn't work. We need to buy tickets for all these people and send them to Ukraine." And as somebody else said, you can send them to most any other place where social, one way. But she fled that to come here. Said this country's put over 200 years into building a beautiful country, and it's been destroyed. And she's right. She's right. And it shouldn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out, but undoubtedly it's going to take some. So what I'm doing tonight is just starting from an early starting point of how we ended up here and were our founding fathers and those who, you know, put everything on the line, thank you, everything on the line, did they have biblical beliefs behind that? Were they Judeo-Christians? Were they not? Some were not. Some were deists. So we'll talk about that just a little bit. Those first group of people that came here, the separatists, and we know them as the Pilgrims, they left England under King James. They were a thorn in his side. He wanted them gone. They wanted to go someplace where they could have religious freedom. And so they don't end up in the United States initially. They end up in Holland. And that was working pretty good for them. Holland was great. They were able to worship according to the way they wanted to worship, but they discovered after a while that their children were becoming Dutch. And they did not want to give up their English heritage. They wanted them to remain English, but they wanted to be able to worship freely. And so they're going to backtrack, come back to England, and they're going to end up in the United States, or what will become the United States. There's a couple of things, a couple of trains of thoughts concerning those first groups that came. The Pilgrims were supposed to end up in Virginia, and they did not. They end up in Plymouth Rock, or what we call Plymouth Rock. One train of thought is this, is that the ship was blown off course a lot, is a reason they ended up where they did. And the other one was that King James told the ship captain, "We don't want them back. Take them somewhere else." They end up in the north in the dead of winter, the worst possible time that they could be, dropped off and left. And so we're going to lose a lot of those people, but those guys worked at it. They stayed in there and survived. And that's how we get our beginnings. King James was done. He does not want any more conflict. This doesn't end the conflict for him, but it does get one group of people out of the way. Before they got off of the Mayflower, they signed a compact, a political arrangement that said, we're going to work together. And these are the things you're going to have to do if we're going to survive. And so the Mayflower Compact created laws for the Pilgrims and non-Pilgrims because there was other people on that ship than just the Pilgrims. It was for the good of their new colony. It was a short document which established that the colonists would remain loyal subjects to the king despite their need for self-governance, and the colonists would create and enact laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices for the good of the colony, and they would abide by those laws. The colonists would create one society, and they'd work together to further it. The colonists would live in accordance with the Christian faith. So we hear a lot today about the United States is not a Christian nation, and we have varied way off the course. But our original foundings was based on that principle. There were those who came who fought for independence and established rules and laws that were not of the same faith, but they all believed that there was a creator, someone higher than the king, and that if they were going to succeed, they had to have the guidance and the presence of the Lord. John Winthrop wrote several years later, The City on a Hill. I know that I'm probably not telling you guys anything that you don't already know. This is history from back in the day before it is muddied with so many things that you can't say or can say or what they want to put in now. But The City on a Hill takes place in 1630. That's in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. It was the model of a Christian charity, to do good, to be good, to follow God's word. Let me make sure I got my right insert in the right place. It said, now the only way to avoid this shipwreck and to provide for our posterity is to follow the counsel of Micah, to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with God. For this end we must be knit together in this work as one man. We must entertain each other in brotherly affection. We must uphold a familiar commerce together in all meekness, gentleness, patience, and liberality. We must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work as members of the same body. So shall we keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. The Lord will be our God and delight to dwell among us as his own people, and will command a blessing upon us in all our ways, so that we shall see much more of his wisdom, power, goodness, and truth than formerly we have been acquainted with. We shall find that the God of Israel is among us, when 10 of us shall be able to resist 1,000 of our enemies, when he shall make us a praise and glory that men shall say of succeeding plantations, may the Lord make it like that of New England. For we must consider that we shall be a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in his work, this work that we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world. All nations have had their eyes on the United States since its founding. They watched after the American Revolution to see if this thing was going to work. It was a new creature. They were watching us then, and they're watching us now. And the whole thing they want to see is that we fall. And so, without God, we will. Now then, let's fast forward out of that time period to the Revolution. The slogan at the time was no taxation without representation. How many have heard that before? No taxation without representation. That was the byword or byphrase of the time, but the colonists did not want any representation in England. Their numbers were so small that if they had representation in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, they would not have been able to pass any legislation to their benefit, and then they would be obligated to follow that legislation. So they cried no taxation without representation, but they didn't want any representation either. During the American Revolution, George Washington encouraged the declaration of days of prayer and fasting as a means of seeking divine assistance in perilous situations, and also supported the proclamation of days of thanksgiving to praise God for his help. He and his officers led church services during the French and Indian War because they had a lack of chaplains. During the American Revolution, he ensured that there were chaplains of various denominations to meet the spiritual needs of his soldiers. He also encouraged them to stop swearing and gambling because he told them that it was unseemly for them to ask God's favor on their efforts if they were constantly going to be insulting him by their behavior. So this whole idea of our founding fathers and those who risked their lives, they constantly go back to the source of all wisdom and strength, and that was God. Every one of them, you'll see, even those who are not considered religious recognize the fact that God is their source, and if they want to make a go of this and they want this country to survive, then they must have His support and He must be honored. We might also keep in mind our 16th President, Abraham Lincoln, also called for national days of prayer and thanksgiving during the Civil War. He encouraged Americans to recognize the last Thursday in November as the day of Thanksgiving, and that eventually it will be passed and become law that the third Thursday of November is Thanksgiving. So it continues on. I used to tell my students in class that if all of our presidents had behaved like George Washington had, we wouldn't be having any issues today. He was very concerned with public image. He wanted the office of president, when he becomes president, to be above board and beyond speculation. People couldn't come up with things that you shouldn't have done or that you wouldn't be a blemish or anything. But he also felt like his private life should be that way too. That what he was doing in public was reflected in his private life and vice versa. We don't seem to have a problem these days with doing one thing in public and something else in private. If they had have followed his pattern, I would like to think that we wouldn't have the issues that we have now. The Constitutional Convention comes along after the Revolutionary War, when the delegates to Philadelphia went to create a new constitution for us. They had the old Articles of Confederation, which is the first Constitution of the United States, but it was very weak. The founders intentionally made the executive branch weak because they'd lived under a king that had absolute power. And they wanted to make sure that they didn't fall into that again, and so they intentionally made the articles weak. It looked like Swiss cheese. You remember that, Cassie? It was full of holes. They couldn't do anything. It didn't take them very long to figure out we have a problem, so they had permission from their states to go back and rework the Articles of Confederation. When they got there, they discovered that they couldn't patch all the holes. So they scrap it and they start over. They were so concerned with making sure that everything, that people could speak freely, that they went to some extreme measures. Benjamin Franklin, who is considered a deist, is the first one who believed that they should open everything in prayer. His resolution does not pass, but they do open with prayer. Deists believe in a supreme being who created the universe to operate solely by natural laws, and after creation, they're absent from the world. Thomas Jefferson is also considered to be a deist. Washington sometimes is considered to be a deist. But even Benjamin Franklin recognized that we needed God's guidance. So they assemble in Philadelphia to work on the Articles of Confederation, rewrite a new constitution, and they don't want the average citizen, and more specifically, the press, to get a hold of what they're doing. So their first agenda item is that they vote to meet in secrecy. It is late May, it's Philadelphia, it's hot, it's humid. They're wearing heavy wool suits and powdered wigs, and they close every door and every window. They post guards outside, and they go to work for like 100 days working on that Constitution. They want the delegates to be able to bring their ideas forth, talk about them, discuss them, work out any issues that they have, and then be able to change their mind. You know, maybe one is stuck on a particular topic and don't think they're going to budge, but after listening to 55 other delegates, they change their mind, and they don't want that information outside the doors until they're finished, because they know what will happen if the press gets a hold of it. The very same thing that happens today. Not a bit different. It's just slower mail getting around then than it is today. They would do the very same thing then as they do now. And so they were very careful about that. In fact, the story goes that Benjamin Franklin loved the ladies. And the ladies love Benjamin Franklin, where they were here in the United States or if they're in Europe. He's a hit wherever he goes. And so the story goes that when he would leave and go out to eat, they would send somebody with him, just in case he had a few glasses too many of sherry that he didn't spill the beans. And so keep him under wraps. One of the attendees at the delegation lost his paperwork, and it was picked up. Didn't make it into the hands of anybody outside of Independence Hall, but Washington gave it back. The name of that person, we don't know who the name of the person was that lost their papers, but Washington handed it back to him and said, you know, you might keep these under wraps just a little bit better. And that's paraphrased, but he was kind with it. He no judgmental remarks, but that they need to really watch what they have. It doesn't take much. Wars and battles have been won and lost because a piece of information is dropped along the way, and it makes it into the hands of the opposing groups. The ladies were not intent on being left out of this deal. Abigail Adams and John Adams were prolific letter writers. Sometimes they wrote several letters a day to each other. Their intent was that those letters never survived, and many of them did not, but some did. But Abigail sent her husband a letter about the ladies of the country. So she said, the future First Lady wrote in part, I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. So she's ahead of her time in that representation. John Adams reads the letter and is like, yes, dear, and is like, yeah, that wasn't going to happen with John Adams. The common thought at the time was that politics was too messy for women. And if you look at the politics today, some of our women are more messy than the men. So it was too messy for women. Women were supposed to stay home, rear the children, and make sure that she is rearing young men to be morally sound and good representatives that can work in politics. That was her job, is to get those boys up and teach them how to be good moral men and then become a part of politics. But the women were off limits. Y'all may get out of here real early. My notes looked a lot longer when I left school today. All right. I have to give you a worksheet then. Okay, let's talk about the separation of church and state. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison are responsible for the documents dealing with separation of church and state, and we hear that a lot today. I did notice during this pandemic that the government has kind of switched agendas with that. They have been all on board for separation of church and state, especially when it comes to finances. At the time, they were still collecting taxes that the money went to a particular church, and Jefferson and Madison both realized that not everybody is of the same faith, and that to collect money from everybody in here would mean that we are leaving out other people and they're getting the results of your labor. So that was one of the reasons for that, that money would not go to a particular denomination when there's multiple denominations. So churches today depend on their offering and tithes, which is fine. I noticed during this pandemic, though, the rest of that story has reversed itself in the fact that the government has been pretty harsh on the church, telling them when they can and cannot meet and how they can meet. The First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States is the religious and political freedom, and it says that the United States government cannot create a religion, and they cannot prohibit the free exercise thereof. That's supposed to be across the board. Now, it's interesting that Jefferson and them put that in when he himself, he didn't mean for a religion not to be a part of government, but he did not want the government dictating what you could or could not do, or what the churches could or could not do. The note says that the founders, above anything else, was pretty hard on this line of thought. It was the belief that a person's faith should not be intruded upon by government, and that religious doctrines should not be written into governance. James Madison was vigorously opposed to religious intrusions into civil affairs. In 1785, when the Commonwealth of Virginia considered passage of a bill establishing a provision for teachers of the Christian religion, Madison wrote his memorial and remonstrance against the religious assessment, in which he presented 15 reasons why government should not become involved in the support of any religion. So they're not separating religion from everything, but they don't want the government dictating what the churches can do and not do. The Establishment Clause separates church from state, but not religion from politics and public life. Individual citizens are free to bring their religious convictions to the public arena, but the government is prohibited from favoring one over the other, except for this year, when they were really good about telling us you can meet or you can't meet. In fact, I think it's Utah that is still in conflict, and the Supreme Court has upheld the law in Utah that you can't have more than 50 people at your service, not 50% of your occupancy, but 50 people. And they took that to court, and they lost. The state won, the people lost, the church lost. So they're still at that 50 number. I don't know. It's a direct, it says Supreme Court, yeah. So I don't know. We have to take a long look at that. They had, after Jefferson, well, before he was inaugurated, but while he was vice president, he opened up the Capitol for church. The United States Capitol regularly served as a church building, a practice that began even before Congress officially moved into the building, and it lasted well after the Civil War. The approval of the Capitol for church was given by both the House and the Senate, with House approval being given by the Speaker of the House and Senate approval being given by the President of the Senate. Interestingly, Jefferson's approval came while he was still, like I said, the Vice President. The city of Washington on June 19th is, they make a declaration that it's with pleasure that they discover the rising consequences of our infant city. Public worship is now regularly administered at the Capitol every Sunday morning at 11 o'clock by the Reverend Mr. Ralph. Jefferson attended church at the Capitol while he was vice president. He also did that throughout his presidency. The first Capitol church service that Jefferson attended as president was a service preached by Jefferson's friend. That's in 1802. Jefferson attended that Capitol church services just 2 days after he penned his famous letter containing the wall of separation between church and state. So you can't say that he didn't intend for religion and government to not coexist when he's having church services in the Capitol itself and attending. He's not the only president. That goes on for several years into the early 1800s that they're still having church at the Capitol. They're just making sure that the government can't dictate what you're doing. That's what they had escaped from England. I don't know, some of you may have seen this before, and there is some suspect information. I'm not going to say it's suspect. Let me back up and change that. This is what is believed happened to those 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence. Has anybody heard that before? Because I'm sure y'all heard all the rest of this in 8th grade history, if you just think back. Were y'all asleep in 8th grade history or gone to a ball game? I hope it wasn't a ball game. Okay, 5 signers were captured by the British as traitors. You know, Benjamin Franklin said, you know, we'll either all hang together or surely we'll be hanged one by one. 5 signers were captured by the British as traitors and tortured before they died. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons in the Revolutionary Army. Another had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 fought and died from wounds or hardships of the war. They signed and they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. What kind of men were they? 24 were lawyers and jurists. 11 were merchants. 9 were farmers and large plantation owners. Men of means, well educated, but they signed the Declaration of Independence knowing full well the penalty would be death if they're captured and if they lose this war. How many people do we have today that's willing to do that? Carter Braxton of Virginia, a wealthy planter and trader, saw his ship swept away from the sea by the British Navy. He sold his home and properties to pay his debts and died in rags. Thomas McKean was so hounded by the British that he was forced to move his family almost constantly. He served in the Congress without pay. That might help our national debt. And his family was kept in hiding. His possessions were taken from him, and poverty was his reward. Vandals or soldiers or both looted the properties of Ellery, Clymer, Hall, Walton, Gwinnett, Hayward, Rutledge, and Middleton. At the Battle of Yorktown, Thomas Nelson Jr. noted that the British General Cornwallis had taken over the Nelson home for his headquarters. The owner quietly urged General George Washington to open fire. The home was destroyed, and Nelson died bankrupt. Francis Lewis had his home and properties destroyed. The enemy jailed his wife, and she died within a few months. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside as she was dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. His fields and his gristmill were laid to waste. For more than a year, he lived in forest and caves, returning home to find his wife dead and his children vanished. A few weeks later, he died from exhaustion and a broken heart. Norris and Livingston suffered similar fates. These are just some of the stories of the people who were willing to risk it all for the country that we live in today. It kind of behooves me that so many people in this country today are willing to let it slip through our fingers. We've had a good taste of what socialism is going to be like. And unless we as Christians, like Brother Eric said last week, get up off of happy and do our part, it can slip through our fingers. It doesn't work. Wherever you're at, it doesn't work. We've gone to Ukraine. I've been fortunate to make 20 trips, and we're planning to go next year. So those of you that have not been that need to go, need to be talking to me. But you can see what it has done. During the 70 years under Stalin, Stalin and some of the presidents since then, the kids in school were told every day, and they had to recite this 3 times a day, 3 times each day, there is no God, there is no God, there is no God. It's drilled into them because their God was the president of that country. There was no hope. That was their whole thing. Get rid of their hope so that they only have the president of that country to look to. They weren't allowed to wear any kind of Christian jewelry or insignia of any kind to school. On Easter and other Christian holidays, you would find the teachers at the churches to see which one of their students were coming in. And then they're penalized when they get back to school after that holiday. I know of a girl that forgot and was scared to death that she had on a necklace with a cross. She slipped it into her shoe, hoping that she wouldn't get caught until she could get out of that school and back home. They didn't have, they were beaten down. They didn't have anything. It was a hard life for them. We have more here. We have our problems, but our country's better than any place that you can go to. We have more rights and privileges if we don't lose them. And Benjamin Franklin said that when he was asked, what do we have, a republic or what? He said, we have a republic if you can hang on to it. We have a republic if we can hang on to it, which means that we have to do something. Those 56 signers and countless others that served in the American Revolution did something. They took those chances. The median age in the 18th century was 16 years old. The signers of the Declaration ranged in age from 26 to 81. They got out there. Benjamin Franklin's the oldest person of the Declaration, of the Constitution, Convention, and all the things that's going on. Spent most of his time in Europe trying to bring more people, more countries in on our side to help us in this war. They were willing to risk it all. How much are we willing to risk? How much do we have to lose? We were talking earlier about the public schools. I was fortunate at the school that I was at that I was able to talk about things that and about God and the Bible that I wouldn't have gotten away with in other schools. Probably wouldn't have gotten away with here in Athens, and I certainly wouldn't have gotten away with it in the Metroplex and some of your larger cities. We could openly discuss, and the kids could ask questions, and I could do my best to answer their questions. And they have lots of questions because they don't know. But what if we'd have been in any part of the Soviet Union or Venezuela or wherever else we have, Cuba, North Korea? Yeah. So what happens there when you lose it all and what it's going to cost to try to get it back? We've gone too far for us to lose it at this point. We just can't do it. And it has to start somewhere. The old adage is that my vote doesn't count. One vote doesn't make a difference. Well, it does. It does make a difference. Another recent Supreme Court issue that's been handed down is that on our electoral college, the electors should vote the direction that their state votes in, but they have not been tied to that. Some states have a winner-take-all. Some states, they divide and partition out the votes. This percentage goes to this person and this percentage goes to that person. But they just handed down a ruling that said if your electoral vote has to go the direction of your state, the vote of your state. So that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing, but it's the people. We don't want a few cities, highly populated cities, in a couple of states determining what the direction of the country is going to be over the will of everyone. Another thing that we talked about, and I'm kind of out of order on my list. The other thing that we talked about in my class was that one of the things people have failed to see, and Brother Eric touched on this last week, was being tied to your party, that a lot of people have not figured out that our parties have switched positions. It's been a slow change, a 40-plus years change, that today's Democratic Party is yesterday's Republican Party, and today's Republican Party is yesterday's Democratic Party. They've changed roles, and people haven't watched because it's been a slow turn. Slow turn. So, and I've had family members who said, my daddy voted this way, my granddaddy voted this way. That's not the same party. That party's gone. It's not there. And so, but it's been such a slow move until they have missed it. Another thing I wanted to touch on, dealing with the Constitution, the founders were, they believed that in order for a person to commit to the country when they're talking about the office of the president, was that it needed to be a natural-born citizen, because you have more of a stake. Your interest is higher if you are a citizen of the United States than if you're an immigrant in from the United States. Currently, people are divided on what the founders intended with that. And I'm not real sure why they're divided, because I think the Constitution is very clear. It specifically says that you are to be a natural-born citizen unless you were living in the United States at the time of the adoption of the Constitution. 4 of our signers on the Declaration were born in Ireland. Most of the people in the United States at the time of the Constitution were of foreign birth. There was, we didn't have a high enough population at that time for them all to be born here. The only exception to someone becoming president of the United States was someone at that time that was not born here. Now, today, we have groups that are divided that says, so long as one parent was born here, they're eligible. Yeah. And that was one of the arguments that was made over President Obama. It wouldn't have mattered if he was or he was not born here, because his mother was. And so, therefore, he is eligible to run for president. So, I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I don't think it's that difficult to figure out. Natural born means born here, not born somewhere else. Yeah, it means born here. All right, just a few interesting facts about the Constitution. The United States Constitution has 4,400 words. It's the oldest and the shortest written constitution of any major government in the world. They got to the point. They didn't dilly around. A proclamation by George Washington and a congressional resolution established the first National Thanksgiving Day on November the 26th, 1789. We've already said that the oldest person signed the Constitution was Benjamin Franklin at 81. The youngest was 26 years old from New Jersey. It took the founders 100 days to actually pen the Constitution, and they worked from 10 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, 6 days a week. 10 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon in a hot wool suit with a closed-in building is long enough. No AC. No AC. James Madison is called the father of the Constitution. He's the only delegate that was there for every session. He took detailed notes of the various discussions and debates that took place during the convention. The journal that he kept during the Constitutional Convention was kept a secret until after he died. It, along with other papers, was purchased by the government in 1837 at a price of $30,000, I'm sorry, which equates to $629,000 today. That seems like kind of like a low number. And the median age at that time is 16. That's pretty young. The life expectancy wasn't as long then as it is now. Mount Vernon has adopted a prayer that Washington gave that they now do each year. I wanted to, when they were doing their wreath-laying ceremony, this is what he had to say. This was his prayer. I now make it my earnest prayer that God would have the United States in his holy protection, that he would incline the hearts of the citizens to cultivate a spirit of subordination and obedience to government, to entertain a brotherly affection and love for one another, for their fellow citizens of the United States at large, and particularly for their brethren who have served in the field, and finally that he would most graciously be pleased to dispose us all to do justice, to love mercy, and to demean ourselves with that charity, humility, and pacific temper of mind which were the characteristics of the divine authority of our blessed religion, and without an humble imitation of whose example in these things we can never hope to be a happy nation. I think his prayer is right on, and I think that we may need to look at that and reconsider that, currently in the way we are heading our nation now. To leave God completely out is to invite destruction. It'll be absolute chaos and destruction. I don't see how those who are in power and those who are screaming and hollering so much want to say that they can deny the fact that we had a Christian background. Did they all have the same religion? No. Were they tolerant of each other? Yes. Did they work for the common good? Yes. Did they sacrifice everything they had to sacrifice to build a nation like what we have? Yes. We can do that again. All right. I know this is early and nobody wanted to leave early, but I do want Shelley to show one video last week when Brother Eric was talking about Marxism, and he used the example of the grades. I did that with my classes, that I had students with high grades, some with low grades, some with the middle grades. I said, this is how this works. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all the grades and we're going to average them together. And then everybody will be happy. By the way, in Ukraine, talking about everybody being happy under socialism, they all have a fence around their yard. You may go up and down a street and all the fences are blue, or they might be orange, or they may be white. I asked why the colors. Was there a significance to the color? No, that's what the government had left over. Whatever they'd been painting, that's the paint that they have left over. They have a fence around their yard. They have a dog just inside the yard. And they do that because of theft. People want what you have. Whatever it is, they want it. And that's how they protect it. So this idea that if everybody is equal, you won't want what the other person's got because you all have that. Yeah, that's not true. It doesn't work that way. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. So anyway, on a lighter side, hopefully you will enjoy this little video. It explains it to my kids in class. You will know who the people are in the video. I had to tell them who they were.
Hello, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Well, I am the government, and I'm really busy now. You have no idea how hard it is to be president.
I always like to say, politics is not a bad profession. If you succeed, there are many rewards. If you disgrace yourself, you can always write a book. So, what you doing here?
I'm redistributing the wealth. I learned in school spreading the wealth is good for everyone.
Well, I learned from real life that it's not. What about the guy you're taking money from?
Okay, so it's good for 75% of the people. Isn't taking money from one person to make 3 others happy a good thing?
No, it's a very bad thing. In fact, there's a word for it. It's called theft.
But it will better the lives of 3/4 of the people.
Actually, it will make life worse for 100% of the people. And we call that socialism.
I can't stand how all you conservatives say socialism, like it's a dirty word.
That's funny. I feel the same way about how you liberals use the word capitalism. How about giving me 5 minutes and let me tell you a story? Jelly bean?
No thanks. I'm good.
Well, they're mine and I'm happy to share some.
That's all right, Ron. As I see it, I'm already entitled to at least half of them.
That's a good one. Not long ago, there was a college professor in Texas, and he...
Oh, can you make it Southern Methodist? I'm gonna have me a presidential library there one day.
Sure.
Yeah, right. When I'm president, I'm gonna have the biggest presidential library in history.
Yeah, because yours is going to be the only one with an adults-only section. Oh, gosh. I just cracked myself up.
So, the professor was teaching one day when one of his students came up with what he thought was a brilliant idea.
Professor, on behalf of the entire class, I would like to go on record and say that socialism works. It gets rid of the upper and lower class. No one is rich and no one is poor. We would all work hard and we would share everything.
Oh, man. Yeah, go us.
Sounds wonderful. We'll be able to have private jets, right?
Don't think it'll work very well.
I feel what you're both saying, and I love you for it. You are both very intelligent women.
You pig!
wasn't me.
Socialism, huh? All right, let's do a little experiment. All grades will be averaged for the next test, and everyone will receive the same grade.
Oh, that sounds good. I mean, the best students will still have pretty good grades, and now nobody will feel like a failure.
Read my lips. No one will be a failure. Right, son? You got it, Pop. This is great news. I better text my buddy Carl. Red Rover, Red Rover. No need to send those answers over.
Yeah, you probably would have got caught anyway. I wish I had that on tape.
So the time came to put the experiment to the test. It didn't seem like much changed. Maybe one or two had doubts.
Very good question. Very direct, and I'm not gonna answer it.
Here, I smoked it, but I never inhaled.
I know, you're not a criminal, right?
I have inhaled and exhaled everything.
Well, class, the results are in. Everyone got a B.
What?
All right, go us!
Bill, this is all your fault. I demand a recount.
Hey, this is perfect. My average just went up. No child left behind, right?
What are you doing? I'm very confused.
The students who had studied hard were upset, while the students who had studied very little were happy. But when the next test rolled around, the students who had studied little studied even less. And the ones who had studied hard decided, since they couldn't make an A, they wanted a free ride. So they also studied less. The second test average was a D. No one was happy. When the third test rolled around, the average grade was an F.
I like the color red because it's a fire, and I always see myself as being on fire.
The scores never increased as bickering, blame, name-calling all resulted in hard feelings. And no one would study for anyone else. To their great surprise, all students failed.
If you think I have worked all these years to let Herb ride on my
I
coattails,
did
and
not cause
you,
this.
are
This
you
is
kidding
not
me?
my
I
fault.
can't make a B on my own.
You see, class, socialism doesn't lift the bottom up. It tears everyone else down.
That was a stupid idea. I could have told you that on tape. Wait, I think I did.
Who came up with this idea anyway?
I'll tell you who came up with it. The new kid.
Ooh, let's get him.
Let me be clear.
Get him!
Never mind.
So, what did you think, Chief?
Interesting story, but I don't see it the same way.
Well, just remember, government's first duty is to protect the people, not run their lives or steal their ambition and dreams. A government big enough to give you everything you want is a government big enough to take away everything you have.
Call it big.
That last part is, I think people fail to think about that. If a government is big enough to give you everything you want, they're big enough to take everything you have away. And all we need to do is just look back through history and look at the countries where the government has taken away everything you had. So, all right, that's all I have. I hope you enjoyed that little, at least that little video. The kids enjoy it once you figure out and tell them who's who in there, but I don't think y'all had any trouble with that. So thank you for your attention. I hope it wasn't too terribly dry and boring, but maybe you found something in there that you didn't know before. So thank y'all.